You're 5 months pregnant, and your millionaire husband just vanished from a restaurant, leaving you with the bill. Humiliating, right? But for Nora Croft, that was just the start. The next morning, there's no apology. Instead, her powerful mother-in-law is at her door, not with comfort, but with the police. Suddenly, Nora is not just the abandoned wife. She's an accused criminal. This is the story of how a powerful family tried to erase a woman, and how that woman decided to fight back with a secret they never knew she could find. The crystal glasses at Aurelia seemed to sweat in the humid Chicago evening, mirroring the fine sheen of perspiration on Nora's temples. It was a place designed to feel like a secret, tucked away on a cobblestone street in the Gold Coast, with velvet ropes and a maitre d' who sized up your net worth before offering a smile. For the past 2 years, this had been her world. A world curated by her husband, Mason Harper. Mason, with his sharp, tailored suits and a smile that could disarm world leaders, was the heir to a logistics empire. Nora had met him not at a charity gala or a yacht club, but in the quiet aisles of a university library where she'd been a graduate student in art history. He'd been charmingly persistent, quoting poets she loved and pretending to be fascinated by 14th century Italian frescoes. He had seemed like a port in a storm, a man of substance in a world she often found shallow. Now, sitting across from him, she felt a familiar, creeping unease. The restaurant was his choice, as all their choices were. He'd ordered for her, the pan-seared scallops. "Light enough for the baby," he'd said with a wink to the waiter, as if their unborn child was a shared, delightful secret. But lately, his secrets felt less delightful, and more like locked doors. "You're quiet tonight, Nora," Mason observed, swirling the deep red wine in his glass, a vintage that cost more than her first car. He hadn't touched his own meal, his plate of seared foie gras remaining a perfect, untouched sculpture. "Just tired," she murmured, placing a hand over the gentle swell of her belly. At 5 months pregnant, a bone-deep weariness had settled into her. It wasn't just the pregnancy. It was the emotional weight of their life together. The lavish parties where she felt like another one of his acquisitions. The passive-aggressive comments from his mother, Beatrice. The way Mason would dismiss her career ambitions with a patronizing pat on the head. "It's been a long week. Has it?" he asked, his tone laced with a detached amusement she'd come to despise. "I thought your biggest challenge was picking out a color for the nursery. Did Dove White or Eggshell win out in the end?" A flush of anger, hot and swift, rose in her chest. She had spent the week finalizing a freelance research project for a local gallery, a small gig she'd fought to keep despite Mason's protests that she didn't need to dabble. He knew this, but he preferred the narrative of her as a kept woman, concerned only with domestic trifles. "The project went well, Mason. The curator was very pleased." She kept her voice even, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "And for the record, we're going with a soft gray." He smirked, taking a slow sip of his wine. "Gray. How pragmatic." His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, scanned the room, dismissing her. It was his signature move, the conversational checkmate. He'd draw her in, prick her with a carefully chosen barb, and then withdraw his attention, leaving her to bleed out emotionally while he moved on to more important matters. Tonight, his distraction was his phone, which buzzed incessantly on the table beside him. He'd glance at it, a flicker of something, annoyance, anxiety, crossing his features before he smoothed them back into a mask of indifference. "Is everything all right?" she asked, the question tasting like a concession. She hated that she still craved his reassurance. "Everything is perfect," he said, the words too sharp, too precise. He finally looked at her, but his gaze was unnervingly vacant, as if he were looking straight through her. "Just business. A deal in Singapore is hitting a snag." It was always a deal, a snag, a complication somewhere across the globe that required his immediate, undivided attention. It was the perfect excuse for his emotional absenteeism. For months, their conversations had been a series of these deflections. She'd try to talk about their future, about the baby, about her fears and hopes, and he would build a wall of corporate jargon and vague promises. A waiter appeared, silent as a wraith, to clear their plates. Mason waved away the dessert menu. "Just the check, please." The finality in his voice sent a shiver down Nora's spine. The air in the opulent room suddenly felt thin, suffocating. The unease that had been simmering all evening began to boil. "Are we leaving so soon?" she asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "I thought we could walk by the lake." It was a desperate plea for a moment of connection, a return to the early days when they would walk for hours, their hands intertwined, their conversations flowing as easily as the water. Mason sighed, a long, theatrical sound of impatience. "Nora, I have an early flight. I just told you about the Singapore deal." He picked up his phone, his thumbs moving rapidly across the screen. "And besides, you need your rest." He was already gone. He was sitting right in front of her, the man who was the father of her child. Yet he was 1,000,000 miles away, lost in a world she was not welcome in. The check arrived in a small leather folio. Mason placed his black credit card on top of it, without even looking at the total. He stood up, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. "I'm going to the washroom before we head out." He leaned down, but instead of kissing her, he brushed his lips against her hair, a gesture so devoid of affection it felt like a dismissal. She watched him walk away, his broad shoulders cutting a confident path through the crowded dining room. He didn't look back. Nora's hand instinctively went to her belly again, a protective gesture. The baby kicked, a soft, fluttering movement that was both a comfort and a source of profound sadness. "Your father is a ghost, little one," she thought, a tear finally escaping and tracing a cold path down her cheek. She waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The waiter returned with the credit card, but Mason hadn't come back to sign. 10 minutes, 15. The ambient chatter of the restaurant started to sound like a roar in her ears. A knot of pure dread tightened in her stomach. She discreetly scanned the room, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. No sign of him. With trembling hands, she pulled out her own phone and called him. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. "Mason, where are you? Is everything okay?" She whispered into the phone, her voice cracking. She tried again. Voicemail. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She flagged down their waiter. "Excuse me, my husband went to the washroom about 20 minutes ago. Could you possibly check on him?" The waiter, a young man with kind eyes, gave her a sympathetic look and nodded. He returned a few minutes later, his expression grim. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, he's not there. One of the valets said he saw a man matching his description leave through the front entrance about 15 minutes ago. He got into a town car and left." The words hit her like a physical blow. The air rushed out of her lungs. It couldn't be. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding. Mason wouldn't just leave, but he had. He had left her. Pregnant, alone, and with a dinner bill that was probably more than she had in her checking account. The waiter placed the leather folio back on the table. Her eyes fell on the black card sitting on top. It wasn't Mason's Centurion card. It was hers. A debit card from the joint account he'd set up for her, the one he called her allowance. The account he could close at any moment. The message was clear. It wasn't a mistake. It was a statement. Her world, so carefully constructed, so gilded and fragile, shattered. The world tilted. For a moment, Nora was sure she would be sick right there on the pristine white tablecloth. The waiter's words echoed in the cavernous space of her mind. He got into a town car and left. The sentence was so simple, so clinical, yet it detonated her reality, leaving behind a ringing silence. Her first instinct was denial. A hot, fierce wave of it. There had to be an explanation, a sudden emergency, a call so critical he couldn't even spare 30 seconds to tell her. But even as the excuses formed, they crumbled against the cold, hard evidence on the table. Her debit card. He hadn't accidentally left his own. He had deliberately swapped it. This was a calculated act, a meticulously planned departure. Her gaze swept the dining room. A few patrons shot her curious glances, their eyes lingering a moment too long. She could feel their pity, their judgment. The woman who was left behind. The story they would tell their friends tomorrow. Did you see that poor woman at Aurelia last night? Her husband just walked out on her. The thought sent a fresh wave of humiliation washing over her, so potent it made her dizzy. She had to get out of there. But the bill, a 3-figure monster, sat between her and the door like a sentinel. She opened the leather folio, her fingers clumsy and numb. The amount stared back at her, obscene in its extravagance. It was more than she'd made in the entire last month from her research project. Mason knew this. He knew the limits of her allowance. This wasn't just abandonment. It was a punishment. But for what? Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She took a deep breath, trying to anchor herself. Think, Nora, just think. She couldn't make a scene. That's what he would expect. He'd probably relish the thought of her, hysterical and helpless, making a fool of herself. She would not give him that satisfaction. With a resolve she didn't know she possessed, she signaled the waiter. He approached the table cautiously, his professional smile tinged with genuine concern. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding," Nora said, her voice surprisingly steady. She was proud of that. It didn't tremble or crack. "My husband had an urgent matter to attend to. I'll be settling the bill." She slid her debit card towards him. The moment he picked it up, a cold dread washed over her. What if Mason had already emptied the account? What if this was part of the cruelty, to have her card declined in front of a room full of strangers? She held her breath as the waiter walked away, the seconds stretching into an agonizing eternity. She focused on a point on the far wall, a painting of a Venetian canal, its colors muted and serene. She tried to transport herself there, to a world of beauty and history. A world before Mason, before the gilded cage had closed around her. She remembered the girl she used to be, the one who would spend her last $20 on a used book and a coffee, and feel like the richest person in the world. Where had that girl gone? The waiter returned, his face unreadable. He placed the receipt and a pen on the table. "Everything is all set, ma'am." Relief, so powerful it almost made her weep, flooded through her. He hadn't cut her off. Not yet. The cruelty had its limits, for now. She signed the receipt, her signature a shaky imitation of its usual confident scrawl. She left a generous tip, a small act of defiance, a refusal to be seen as the victim she felt like. As she stood, her legs felt unsteady, like a newborn foal's. She gathered her small clutch, her movements slow and deliberate. She refused to scurry out in shame. Head held high, she walked through the restaurant, her gaze fixed on the heavy oak doors at the entrance. She could feel the eyes on her back, but she didn't flinch. She was an art historian, trained to observe. Now she was the exhibit, a portrait of a woman on the verge of collapse, framed by the opulent decor of a life that was no longer hers. The cool night air hit her as she stepped onto the cobblestone street. It was a relief after the stuffy, judgmental atmosphere of the restaurant. She leaned against the cold brick of the building, taking deep, shuddering breaths. The city sounds, the distant wail of a siren, the laughter from a nearby bar, seemed to come from a great distance. She tried calling Mason again. Voicemail. She sent a text, her thumbs shaking so badly she had to type it 3 times. Mason, I don't understand. Where are you? Please call me. The message delivered, but no reply came. The valet, a young man with a kind face, approached her. Mrs. Harper, is your car coming? Her car. Mason's car. The sleek, black Mercedes he'd bought her for her birthday. The car that was registered in his name. She felt a fresh pang of fear. Was that gone too? She gave him the ticket, her heart in her throat. After a few minutes that felt like hours, the familiar headlights rounded the corner. Another small mercy. She drove home in a daze, the city lights blurring into abstract streaks of color. The 20-minute drive to their Lincoln Park brownstone felt like a journey across a foreign land. Every street corner, every landmark, seemed to mock her with shared memories. That was the park where he'd proposed. That was the cafe where they'd had their first date. That was the theater where they'd seen that play she loved, and he'd fallen asleep. Her life was a museum of a love that had perhaps never been real. Had it all been a lie? The charming poet in the library, the whirlwind romance, the perfect wedding. Was it all a performance? And if so, why? When she pulled into their private garage, the house was dark and silent. The emptiness of it was a physical presence, a cold, heavy blanket that smothered her. She walked through the marble foyer, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The house, which had once felt like a symbol of their success, now felt like a mausoleum. It was his house, filled with his furniture, his art, his taste. She was just a temporary resident. She went straight to their bedroom. His closet was half empty. His favorite suits, the ones he wore for business trips, were gone. His watchbox was open, the space where his Rolex usually sat, empty. His travel bag was missing. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. He had packed. He had planned this. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it stole her breath. It wasn't just that he had left. It was the how of it. The public humiliation, the calculated cruelty, the silent, chilling efficiency of his departure. He hadn't just ended their marriage. He had tried to erase her, to strip her of her dignity, to leave her with nothing. She sank onto the edge of their king-sized bed, the bed they had shared, the bed where their child had been conceived. A sob, raw and ragged, tore from her throat. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated grief. She wrapped her arms around her belly, her body shaking with the force of her sorrow. "It's okay, little one," she whispered to the unborn child, the words a desperate lie. "We're going to be okay." But as she sat there, alone in the cavernous, silent house, with the ghost of her husband's cologne still hanging in the air, she had never felt less okay in her entire life. The echo of his abandonment was all that was left. Sleep was a distant country Nora couldn't reach. She spent the night drifting in a gray twilight of shock and despair, her mind replaying the scene at Aurelia on a torturous loop. Every detail was seared into her memory. The glint of Mason's cufflinks as he stood up, the vacant look in his eyes, the final dismissive brush of his lips against her hair. Each time the memory played, the betrayal cut deeper. She wandered through the silent house like a ghost, her bare feet cold against the polished hardwood floors. She found herself in the nursery, the room that was supposed to be a sanctuary of hope. The soft gray paint she'd chosen now seemed bleak and funereal. The unassembled crib, still in its box, felt like a monument to a future that had been stolen from her. She ran her hand over the smooth, cool wood of the rocking chair she'd picked out, the one she'd imagined herself in, humming lullabies to her baby. The image was so clear, so painful, it brought a fresh torrent of tears. By the time the first pale light of dawn crept through the windows, Nora was emotionally and physically exhausted. Her eyes were swollen and raw, and a dull headache throbbed at her temples. The baby was quiet, as if sensing its mother's distress. The thought of the tiny, innocent life inside her was the only thing that kept her from completely shattering. She had to be strong. For the baby. She forced herself to go through the motions of a normal morning. A shower, a cup of decaf tea, her hands shaking so badly she nearly spilled it. She tried to eat a piece of toast, but her throat was too tight, and the food tasted like cardboard. She knew she had to do something. She couldn't just sit here and wait. But what? Call his parents? His friends? The police? The thought of talking to anyone, of having to voice the humiliating truth of what had happened, was mortifying. My husband walked out on me in the middle of dinner. It sounded like the plot of a bad movie. Just as she was trying to summon the courage to call her own parents, who were retired and living a quiet life in Michigan, the doorbell chimed. Its melodic tone, usually a welcome sound, now felt like an intrusion, an alarm. Her heart leaped into her throat. Mason. For a wild, hopeful moment, she thought it was him. He'd come back. It was all a terrible, cruel joke, a misunderstanding. He would have a story, an explanation, and he would wrap her in his arms and everything would be all right again. She rushed to the door, her bare feet slapping against the marble floor. She peered through the peephole, her hope instantly turning to ice in her veins. It wasn't Mason. It was his mother. Beatrice Harper stood on the doorstep, a vision of icy elegance. She was dressed in a crisp, cream-colored pantsuit, her silver hair styled in a perfect, immovable coif. Her face, which Nora had once mistaken for serene, now looked like a mask carved from granite. In her hand, she clutched a designer handbag like a weapon. Nora's hand trembled as she unlocked the door. 1,000 questions swirled in her mind. Did she know? Had Mason called her? Was she here to offer comfort, an explanation? "Beatrice," Nora said, her voice hoarse. "Come in." Beatrice swept past her without a word, her expensive perfume filling the foyer. She didn't look at Nora. Instead, her sharp, critical eyes scanned the entryway, as if looking for flaws. She stopped in the center of the living room, her back to Nora, a rigid, imposing figure. "I expected to hear from you last night," Beatrice said, her voice as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Nora's confusion deepened. "Hear from me. Beatrice, I don't understand. Something happened. Mason." "Oh, I know what happened," Beatrice cut her off, finally turning to face her. The look on her face was one of pure, unadulterated contempt. There was no sympathy in her eyes, no trace of concern, only a chilling, reptilian coldness. "My son called me. He told me everything." Relief, foolish and misplaced, flickered in Nora's chest. "He called you? Is he okay? Where is he?" Beatrice let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "Is he okay? That's rich, coming from you. He's devastated, of course. Humiliated. But he's a survivor. He'll get through this." The world started to spin again. Humiliated? Devastated? Was she talking about the same man who had coolly and deliberately abandoned his pregnant wife? "I don't understand," Nora whispered, her voice barely audible. "He left me." "Don't you dare play the victim with me, Nora!" Beatrice hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. She took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. "Mason finally found out the truth, about you, about your lies, about the baby. The last two words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. "The baby?" Nora repeated, her hand flying to her stomach in a protective gesture. "What about the baby?" "Don't pretend you don't know," Beatrice sneered. "My son is many things, but he is not a fool. He knows that child is not his." The accusation was so monstrous, so outrageously false, that for a moment Nora couldn't even process it. It was like being struck by lightning on a clear day. The shock was so profound it left her numb, speechless. "What?" she finally managed to choke out, the word a strangled gasp. "That's insane. That's a lie." "Is it?" Beatrice's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Mason has his doubts. And frankly, so have I. You were always too ambitious for your own good, weren't you? The poor little art student snagging the millionaire heir. It was all a little too perfect. A baby was just the next logical step in your plan, wasn't it? The ultimate insurance policy." The venom in her words was suffocating. Nora felt like she was drowning in it. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a character assassination, a carefully constructed narrative designed to destroy her. "That's not true," Nora said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "I love Mason, and this baby is his. How could you even suggest something so vile?" "Because my son's happiness is the only thing that matters to me," Beatrice said, her voice rising. "And you have made him miserable. You have trapped him, manipulated him. But it's over. He's free of you now." The pieces started to click into place, forming a picture of a conspiracy so cold-blooded it was almost unbelievable. Mason's emotional distance, his strange behavior, the meticulously planned exit. It was all connected. This wasn't just him leaving her. It was a coordinated attack. "Where is he?" Nora demanded, a new strength, born of righteous fury, surging through her. "I want to talk to him. He needs to tell me this to my face." "You will not be speaking to my son," Beatrice declared, her voice ringing with an authority that was absolute. "He is on his way to Singapore, where he will be for the foreseeable future. He has left instructions. You are to vacate this house by the end of the week. His lawyers will be in touch regarding the formalities. Vacate the house." The words were a death sentence to the life she knew. She was being thrown out, discarded like a piece of trash. Pregnant, alone, and now homeless. "You can't do this," Nora said, tears of rage and helplessness streaming down her face. "This is my home. I'm carrying his child." "You're carrying a child," Beatrice corrected her, her voice dripping with malice. "And as for this house, my dear, your name is on none of the paperwork. You have no claim to anything. You are, and always have been, a guest here. And your stay is over." Beatrice turned to leave, her mission accomplished. She had delivered her poison, shattered Nora's world, and was now ready to walk away, leaving Nora to bleed out in the ruins. But as she reached the door, she paused and turned back, a final chilling thought crossing her mind. "Oh, and Nora," she said, her voice deceptively sweet. "Don't even think about fighting this. Mason has the best lawyers in the country. If you try to make a scene, if you try to claim that child is his without irrefutable proof, we will not only fight you, we will ruin you. We will paint you as a gold-digging adulteress, and we will make sure you never see a cent. Is that clear?" The threat, so blatant and brutal, hung in the air. It was a declaration of war. And Nora, standing alone in the silent, opulent house, knew that she was hopelessly outgunned. The silence that Beatrice left in her wake was more deafening than any shout. It was a void, a vacuum where Nora's life used to be. For a long time, she stood frozen in the living room, the ghost of her mother-in-law's perfume and the poison of her words hanging heavy in the air. The accusation, that child is not his, was a splinter of ice in her heart, spreading its chill through her entire body until she was numb. This wasn't just a breakup. It was an erasure. They weren't just leaving her. They were trying to rewrite history, to paint her as the villain in a story she didn't even know she was in. The precision of it all was what terrified her the most. Mason's disappearance, the packed bags, Beatrice's immediate arrival, the pre-packaged lies, the legal threats. This was a coup, planned with military precision. A wave of nausea, sour and acidic, rose in her throat. She stumbled to the downstairs bathroom, her body convulsing as she retched into the toilet. There was nothing in her stomach to bring up, only the bitter taste of betrayal. She collapsed onto the cold tile floor, her cheek pressed against the cool porcelain, her body trembling with a toxic cocktail of grief, rage, and fear. How could this be happening? How could the man who had quoted Rilke to her in a dusty library, the man who had held her hand and promised her a lifetime of adventures, be capable of such calculated cruelty? And Beatrice, the woman who had smiled through their wedding photos, who had hosted their engagement party, who had feigned maternal affection for 2 years. Had it all been a lie? The numbness began to recede, replaced by a white-hot anger. An anger so pure and clarifying it burned away her tears. They thought she would crumble. They thought she would pack her bags, disappear with her tail between her legs, and accept the narrative they had created for her. They had underestimated her. They had mistaken her kindness for weakness, her love for naivety. With a surge of adrenaline, she pushed herself up from the floor. She splashed cold water on her face, staring at her reflection in the ornate mirror. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale and drawn. She looked like a victim, but she didn't feel like one. Not anymore. She marched back into the living room, her mind racing. Lawyers. Beatrice had threatened her with lawyers. That meant they were expecting a fight. It also meant they had something to hide. People who have the truth on their side don't need to resort to such elaborate, vicious tactics. Her first instinct was to call her parents. But what would she say? How could she explain this monstrous, unbelievable situation? They would worry themselves sick, and they didn't have the resources to fight a titan like the Harper family. No, she couldn't drag them into this. Not yet. She needed proof. Proof that the baby was Mason's. Proof that their marriage was real. Proof that she wasn't the person they were painting her to be. Her mind seized on one thing: the prenatal appointments. Dr. Evans, her obstetrician. The records would show everything. The conception date, the ultrasounds, the genetic screenings. It was all there, in black and white. But as she reached for her phone to call the doctor's office, a new, colder fear gripped her. The appointments had been booked by Mason's assistant. The clinic was one of the most exclusive in the city, one that catered to the wealthy elite. A place where discretion was paramount, a place where records could be managed. Could Mason's influence extend that far? Could he have already gotten to them? The paranoia was a physical thing, making her skin crawl. She felt like she was in a spy thriller, a pawn in a game where she didn't even know the rules. Just then, the doorbell rang again. This time the sound was sharp, aggressive, not melodic. Her body tensed. Was it Beatrice, back for another round of psychological warfare? She crept to the door, her heart pounding. Through the peephole, she saw 2 people. A man in a sharp, dark suit, and a woman in a police uniform. Her blood ran cold. She opened the door a crack, her hand shaking. "Can I help you?" The man in the suit, who had the cold, predatory eyes of a shark, flashed a badge. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Miller, Chicago PD, and this is Officer Davis. We'd like to ask you a few questions." "Questions? About what?" Nora asked, her voice a reedy whisper. "We've received a complaint," Detective Miller said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "From Mrs. Beatrice Harper, on behalf of her son, Mr. Mason Harper." Nora felt the floor drop out from under her. This was it, the next phase of the attack. "A complaint about what?" she managed to ask. "The complaint alleges theft and fraud," the detective said, his eyes boring into hers. "Specifically, the unauthorized use of a credit card and the theft of several valuable personal items, including a Patek Philippe watch." The world swam before Nora's eyes. The dinner, the credit card he had left for her, the watch that was missing from his closet. They weren't just accusing her of adultery, they were pressing criminal charges. They were trying to put her in jail. That's absurd," she stammered, her mind reeling. "He left the card for me, to pay for the dinner, and I haven't stolen anything. He packed his own bags." "We just need to ask you a few questions, ma'am," Detective Miller repeated, his tone making it clear it wasn't a request. "May we come in?" She was trapped. If she said no, it would look like she had something to hide. If she said yes, she would be walking into their trap. She had no lawyer, no one to advise her. It was just her, alone, against the full force of the Harper family and, it seemed, the Chicago Police Department. She opened the door wider, her movements stiff and robotic. "Come in." They sat in the cavernous living room, the two officers on the plush sofa, Nora perched on the edge of an armchair opposite them. The detective's questions were a relentless barrage, each one designed to trip her up, to make her look guilty. "So, you admit to using Mr. Harper's card at the restaurant?" "He left it for me. It was a joint account. But he wasn't present when you made the transaction. Is that correct?" "He had just left. He told me he was going to the washroom. And you didn't find it strange that he was gone for so long?" "Of course I did. I was worried." "Did you make any attempt to contact him before using the card?" "Yes, I called him. I texted him. He didn't answer." Each answer felt like a confession, each detail twisted into something sinister. They asked about the watch, about his other belongings. They asked about her finances, her allowance, her freelance work. They were building a case, brick by brick, painting a picture of a desperate, greedy woman who had been cut off and had decided to take what she believed she was owed. It was a masterpiece of cruelty. They had taken every detail of their life together and weaponized it against her. After what felt like an eternity, the detective closed his notebook. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mrs. Harper. Or is it Ms. Reed now?" The question was a deliberate jab, a reminder of her precarious position. "My name is Nora Harper," she said, her voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. "I am his wife." The detective just gave her a small, pitying smile. "We'll be in touch." As she closed the door behind them, the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. This was no longer just a marital dispute. This was a war for her freedom, for her reputation, for the future of her child. They weren't just trying to divorce her. They were trying to annihilate her. She sank to the floor, her back against the heavy oak door, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she didn't cry. She was too terrified to cry. The press of charges, the cold reality of a potential criminal record, had shocked her into a state of chilling clarity. They thought they had her cornered. They thought she was a mouse in their trap. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous. And Nora Harper, née Reed, was done being the prey. The fight for her life had just begun. The detective's visit shattered the last vestiges of Nora's disbelief. This was real. The threat wasn't just of poverty or public shame. It was of a prison cell. The thought of giving birth in custody, of her child being born into a world where its mother was a convicted felon, was a horror beyond anything she could have imagined. That horror became her fuel. She had 1 week to vacate the house, 1 week to find a place to live, to find a lawyer, and to start fighting back. The clock was ticking, and the Harper empire had a formidable head start. Her first call was to the one person she knew she could trust implicitly, her older sister, Maya. Maya was everything Nora wasn't, a fierce, pragmatic ER doctor who lived in a cramped but cozy apartment in Wicker Park and had never trusted Mason from the start. She'd called him the Ken doll, all polished surface with nothing underneath. Nora had always defended him, but now, Maya's words echoed in her mind with prophetic clarity. She dialed the number, her hands still trembling. When Maya answered, her voice brisk and professional, Nora broke down. The whole sordid story came pouring out in a torrent of sobs and fragmented sentences. The dinner, the abandonment, Beatrice's venom, the police. Maya listened without interruption, a skill she'd honed in the chaos of the emergency room. When Nora was finished, her voice raw and spent, Maya's response was immediate and unequivocal. "I'm coming to get you. Pack a bag, just the essentials. Your documents, your laptop, clothes. Don't take anything they could claim was a gift. We'll figure the rest out later. I'll be there in 30 minutes. The calm authority in her sister's voice was a lifeline. For the first time in 24 hours, Nora didn't feel completely alone. She moved through the house on autopilot, pulling a suitcase from the back of her closet. Her old, battered suitcase from college, not the designer luggage Mason had bought her. She packed her research papers, her laptop, the few pieces of jewelry she'd inherited from her grandmother, and simple, comfortable clothes. She walked past the designer gowns and diamond earrings with a sense of detachment, as if they belonged to another woman. When Maya arrived, she took one look at Nora's pale, tear-streaked face and enveloped her in a fierce hug. "We're going to fight this, Nora," she said, her voice fierce. "We're going to burn them to the ground." Maya's apartment was a sanctuary of normalcy. It was small and a little messy, with stacks of medical journals on the coffee table and a cat named Murphy, who regarded Nora with sleepy indifference. It was a world away from the cold, sterile perfection of the Lincoln Park brownstone. Here, Nora could finally breathe. That evening, over takeout pizza that Maya had insisted on, they started to strategize. Maya, with her logical, diagnostic mind, laid out their priorities. First, a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a shark. Someone who isn't afraid to go up against the Harpers' legal army. Second, we need to get ahead of their narrative. They're painting you as a gold-digging adulteress. We need to prove you're not. Third, and most important, is the baby. We need irrefutable proof of paternity, and we need to make sure they can't tamper with it. The task seemed insurmountable. The Harpers had unlimited resources. Nora had a few $1,000s in her personal savings account, and a sister who worked double shifts at the hospital. "How can we possibly afford a lawyer who can take them on?" Nora asked, the despair creeping back into her voice. "Let me worry about that," Maya said, her expression determined. "I have some savings, and I know some people. A doctor I work with, her husband is a partner at a big downtown firm. It's a long shot, but I can at least get a name, a recommendation." The next morning, while Maya was at the hospital, Nora started her own research. She couldn't just sit by and wait. She needed to be proactive. She started digging into Mason's life, his business, anything that might give her some leverage. She'd been so willfully ignorant during their marriage, content to let him handle the finances, the investments, the details of his corporate world. She had believed it was a sign of trust. Now she saw it for what it was. A way to keep her powerless. She logged into the joint account, the one he'd left her the debit card for. To her surprise, it was still active. There was a balance of a few $1,000s. It was a pittance to him, but to her, it was a lifeline. She immediately transferred the entire amount to her personal savings account, an account he didn't know existed. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. Then, she started looking through the transaction history. It was mostly her expenses, groceries, clothes, lunches. But as she scrolled back, further and further, a pattern began to emerge. Regular payments, thousands of dollars at a time, to a single recipient, a private investigation firm. The payments had started about 6 months ago, right around the time Mason had started to become distant. He had been investigating her for months. The realization sent a chill down her spine. He had been building a case against her long before he walked out of that restaurant. He hadn't just found out the truth, as Beatrice claimed. He had been trying to manufacture it. Her mind raced. What could he have been looking for? An affair? She had been completely faithful. Financial misdeeds? She had no access to his real money. She was a model wife, a perfect trophy. So what was he searching for? The answer, when it came to her, was so simple, so obvious. She couldn't believe she hadn't seen it before. He wasn't looking for something she had done. He was looking for something she was. He was digging into her past, her family, her life before him. Why? That evening, when Maya came home, exhausted from a 12-hour shift, Nora showed her the bank statements. Maya's eyes narrowed as she looked at the payments to the PI firm. "The snake," she breathed. "He was planning this all along." She then handed Nora a business card. "I got a name. A woman named Sarah Chen. My friend says she's a dragon, specializes in high-conflict divorces. She's expensive, but she offers a free consultation. I booked you an appointment for tomorrow morning." The law office of Chen and Associates was on the 40th floor of a skyscraper in the Loop, with panoramic views of the city. Sarah Chen was a petite woman in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of calm, unshakable confidence. She listened to Nora's story without interruption, her expression unreadable. When Nora was finished, Sarah leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled. "This is a classic narcissistic discard, Ms. Reed," she said, her voice calm and measured. "The love bombing, the isolation, the devaluation, and finally, the calculated cruel exit. The false accusations, the smear campaign. It's all from the same playbook. The Harpers are trying to bully you into submission. They're counting on you being too scared and too broke to fight back. I am scared," Nora admitted, her voice trembling slightly, "and I am broke." "You have more than you think," Sarah said, a small smile playing on her lips. "You have the truth, and you have something they want to be rid of, a legitimate heir to the Harper fortune. That makes you a threat, and it gives you leverage." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes locking with Nora's. "The criminal charges are a scare tactic. They're baseless, and they know it. We can get them dismissed. The real fight is the divorce and the paternity of your child. We need to get a court-ordered paternity test immediately, and we need to file for divorce before they do so we can control the narrative." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "This will be a nasty, brutal fight, Nora. They will dig into every corner of your life. They will try to break you. Are you ready for that?" Nora thought of her unborn child, of the life she wanted for them, a life free from the poison of the Harper family. She thought of the girl she used to be, the one who was strong and independent and full of hope. She wanted to be that girl again. "Yes," Nora said, her voice clear and strong. "I'm ready." Sarah Chen smiled, a genuine warm smile this time. "Good. Because I have a feeling we're going to find some very interesting skeletons in the Harper family closet." She picked up her phone. "Let's get to work." In that moment, sitting in the sun-drenched office high above the city, Nora felt a flicker of hope. She had found her unlikely ally. The dragon was on her side. The war had begun. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal strategy and emotional fortification. Sarah Chen moved with breathtaking speed and precision. Within 48 hours, she had filed a motion to dismiss the bogus criminal charges, filed for divorce on Nora's behalf, citing irreconcilable differences, and, most critically, petitioned the court for an emergency order compelling Mason to submit to a paternity test. "We need to strike hard and fast," Sarah explained during one of their late-night strategy sessions in her office, surrounded by takeout containers and stacks of legal documents. They're used to being the aggressors. We're flipping the script. Now they're on the defensive. The Harper family's response was swift and predictable. Their legal team, a phalanx of grim-faced men from a white-shoe law firm, filed a counter-motion to block the paternity test, citing Mason's unavailability due to his extended business in Singapore and reiterating their slanderous claims about Nora's infidelity. "They're stalling," Sarah said with a grim satisfaction, tapping the document with her pen. "And that tells me everything I need to know. They're terrified of that test." While the lawyers battled in court, Nora and Maya focused on their own investigation. Armed with the name of the PI firm from the bank statements, Nora went down a rabbit hole of online research. The firm, a discreet agency called Veritas Solutions, specialized in asset protection and due diligence for high-net-worth individuals. Their website was slick and corporate, but a little digging revealed a darker reputation. They were known for their aggressive, borderline unethical tactics, for finding leverage where none existed. Nora's mind kept returning to the same question. What were they looking for? If it wasn't an affair, what secret from her past could be so damaging that Mason would go to such extreme lengths to use it against her? Her past was an open book. She'd grown up in a quiet, middle-class family in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Her parents were retired school teachers. She had no criminal record, no secret debts, no hidden scandals. She was, for all intents and purposes, boringly normal. "Maybe it's not about you, Nora," Maya suggested one evening, as they were poring over Nora's research. "Maybe it's about them. Maybe they're afraid of something you might find out." The thought was a revelation. All this time she had assumed she was the target. But what if she was just collateral damage in a much bigger war? What if the secret wasn't hers, but theirs? The focus of her investigation shifted. She started digging into the Harper family, into the history of their logistics empire, Harper Worldwide. On the surface, it was a classic American success story. Mason's grandfather had started the company with a single truck after World War II and had built it into a global powerhouse. But as Nora peeled back the layers of glowing press releases and fawning business articles, she began to find cracks in the facade. She found old newspaper articles about a bitter family dispute after the grandfather's death, a lawsuit filed by his brother who claimed he had been cheated out of his share of the company. The lawsuit had been quietly settled out of court. She found whispers of shady business dealings in the company's early days, rumors of connections to organized crime, of union-busting tactics. But it was all circumstantial, old gossip with no hard evidence to back it up. The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One afternoon, a plain manila envelope arrived for Nora at Maya's apartment. There was no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typewritten message. "They are afraid you will find out about the first wife." The words sent a jolt through Nora. The first wife. Mason had never mentioned being married before. As far as she knew, she was his one and only. Beatrice had certainly never spoken of another daughter-in-law. "It has to be a trick," Maya said, her voice laced with suspicion. "A trap. They're trying to send you on a wild goose chase." "Maybe," Nora said, her mind racing. "But it doesn't feel like their style. Their style is a sledgehammer. This is subtle." She showed the note to Sarah Chen the next day. The lawyer's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. "This is it," she said, her voice hushed with excitement. "This is the skeleton. A secret first wife? In a family as image-obsessed as the Harpers? This is gold, Nora." Sarah's team of paralegals and investigators, a group of whip-smart young women Nora had come to admire, descended upon the public records archives with the tenacity of bloodhounds. They searched marriage licenses, divorce decrees, property records, anything that could corroborate the anonymous tip. For days, they found nothing. It was as if the woman had never existed. The Harper family had done an expert job of scrubbing her from the records. But they had made one mistake. A young paralegal named Maria, a woman with a genius for finding needles in digital haystacks, discovered a property transfer from 25 years ago. A small house in a working-class suburb of Milwaukee. The property had been transferred from Mason Harper to a woman named Isabella Rossi. The transfer had been signed just a week before Mason had officially enrolled in his prestigious East Coast boarding school. He would have been 18 at the time. The name meant nothing to Nora. But a quick search of Wisconsin court records revealed the truth. Isabella Rossi had filed for divorce from Mason Harper 25 years ago, citing extreme cruelty. The divorce had been sealed, the records hidden from public view. But the property transfer was the one loose thread they had failed to snip. And then came the final devastating piece of the puzzle. Another search, this time of birth records in Milwaukee County. A boy, named Leo Rossi, had been born to Isabella Rossi 7 months after the divorce was finalized. No father was listed on the birth certificate. Mason had a son. A 24-year-old son he had abandoned, just as he was now abandoning her and their unborn child. The revelation was staggering. This was the secret. This was the shame that the image-obsessed Harper family had buried for a quarter of a century. A teenage marriage to a working-class girl. A secret child. It was the ultimate stain on their pristine reputation. And now, Nora understood. Her middle-class background, her lack of a pedigree, her independence, it had all been a terrifying echo of the past for Beatrice. She saw in Nora another Isabella, another threat to the family's carefully constructed dynasty. And the baby? Her baby was another illegitimate heir who could one day lay claim to the Harper fortune. This wasn't just about her. It was about history repeating itself. And Beatrice was determined to stop it, no matter the cost. "They weren't investigating you to find dirt, Nora," Sarah said, her voice grim. "They were investigating you to see if you knew, to see if you had any connection to Isabella or her son. When you got pregnant, they panicked. They had to get rid of you before you got too entrenched, before you found out the truth and used it against them. The cruelty of it all was breathtaking. They had destroyed her life, tried to ruin her reputation, tried to take her child, all to protect a lie." "What do we do now?" Nora asked, her voice shaking with a cold, hard rage. Sarah Chen smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. "Now," she said, "now we drop the bomb." She picked up her phone and dialed the number for the Harpers' lead attorney. "Mr. Davenport, Sarah Chen calling. I think it's time we had a real conversation. I have a few new names I'd like to discuss with you. The first one is Isabella Rossi. The second is Leo." The silence on the other end of the line, Sarah later told Nora, was the most satisfying sound she had ever heard. The facade had cracked. And now, they were going to bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. The discovery of Mason's first family, his secret wife, his abandoned son, was the seismic event that shifted the entire landscape of the war. The Harpers' legal team, once so arrogant and dismissive, went into a state of panicked silence. Their motions were withdrawn. Their aggressive tactics ceased. They were back on their heels, and Sarah Chen pressed the advantage relentlessly. She arranged a settlement conference at her office. It was a neutral ground, but it felt like Nora's territory. She was no longer the frightened victim. She was the one holding all the cards. The day of the conference, Nora chose her outfit with care. Not a power suit, but a simple, elegant maternity dress in a soft blue. She wanted them to see her, to see the life she was carrying. She wanted them to look at her belly and be reminded of the son Mason had already thrown away. Mason was there. It was the first time she had seen him since he'd walked out of Aurelia. He looked thinner, his face etched with lines of stress she'd never seen before. The confident, charming man she had married was gone, replaced by a haunted, hollowed-out stranger. He refused to meet her eyes. his gaze fixed on a point on the far wall. Beatrice was there too, a statue of fury carved from ice. Her face was a mask of hatred, but for the first time, Nora could see the fear behind it. The fear of exposure, of her perfect world crumbling to dust. Their lead lawyer, a silver-haired man named Davenport, began with a blustering attempt at control, but Sarah cut him off before he could finish his first sentence. "Let's dispense with the theatrics, shall we, Mr. Davenport?" Sarah said, her voice cool and sharp. "We're not here to negotiate the terms of a simple divorce. We're here to discuss the consequences of 25 years of fraud, conspiracy, and emotional abuse." She laid out their terms, her voice never rising, each word a carefully placed stone in the wall of their demands. First, the immediate dismissal of all criminal charges, with a formal letter of apology from the Chicago PD for the harassment. Second, a public retraction of all defamatory statements made against Nora. Third, a court-enforced paternity test for Nora's child to be conducted the day after the birth. And then she delivered the final devastating blow. "And fourth," she said, her eyes locking on Beatrice, "a trust fund, a substantial irrevocable trust fund to be established not only for Nora's child, but also for Mason's first son, Leo Rossi." The name hung in the air, an unexploded bomb. Mason flinched as if he'd been struck. Beatrice's face, already pale, went ashen. "This is blackmail," Davenport sputtered, his face flushing with anger. "No," Sarah corrected him calmly. "This is justice. You see, we've been in contact with Isabella Rossi, a lovely woman. She's had a hard life, raising her son alone, with no support from his father. She was young and scared when you forced her to sign that NDA, when you paid her off and sealed the records. But she's not scared anymore. And her son, Leo, a bright young man who has spent his whole life wondering who his father is very interested in hearing his story. A story I'm sure the Chicago Tribune would be fascinated to tell. The threat was clear. They could settle, quietly and privately, or they could face a public relations nightmare that would destroy the Harper family name forever. Beatrice finally broke her silence. Her voice was a low, venomous hiss. "You will not do this. You will not destroy my family." Nora looked at the woman who had tried to ruin her, and for the first time, she didn't feel anger or fear. She felt a profound, aching pity. "Your family was already destroyed, Beatrice," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It was destroyed by its own secrets, its own cruelty. I'm just turning on the lights." She finally turned to Mason, forcing him to look at her. His eyes were filled with a toxic cocktail of shame, resentment, and self-pity. "Why, Mason?" she asked, the question that had haunted her for weeks. "Why not just ask for a divorce? Why all of this? The humiliation, the lies?" He looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "My mother," he began, his voice weak. "She said you were just like her, that you would try to trap me, to take everything." "Like Isabella?" Nora pressed, her voice gentle but relentless. "Did you ever love her, Mason? Or was she just a mistake you had to erase?" He didn't answer. He just stared at his hands, a broken man, a puppet whose strings had finally been cut. And in that moment, Nora knew the truth. He had never loved her. He had never loved anyone. He was a hollow man, a reflection of his mother's ambitions and fears. The settlement was signed before the end of the day. The Harpers agreed to all of their terms. The war was over. A few weeks later, Nora stood in the empty Lincoln Park brownstone one last time. She had won. She had financial security for herself and her children. Both of them. She had her reputation back. She was free. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a tragedy. She had arranged, through Sarah, to meet Isabella and Leo. She wanted them to know the truth. She wanted Leo to have the chance to decide for himself if he ever wanted to meet the man who was his father. She placed her hand on her belly, where her own child was growing, kicking with a strength that mirrored her own. This child would know the truth. This child would be raised with love, not lies. This child would be free from the poison of the Harper legacy. She walked out of the house and didn't look back. She was no longer Nora Harper, the millionaire's wife. She was Nora Reed, a mother, a survivor, a woman who had walked through the fire and emerged not unscathed but whole. Her future was her own, a blank canvas waiting for her to paint it. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that it would be beautiful. Conclusion: redemption and new beginnings. Months later, Nora gave birth to a healthy baby girl with a shock of dark hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. She named her Hope. She had met with Isabella and Leo. The meeting was emotional, a strange and beautiful collision of past and future. Isabella was a warm, resilient woman who had built a good life for herself and her son. Leo was a kind, intelligent young man with Mason's eyes, but none of his hollowness. He was curious about his father, but not bitter. He had been raised with love, and it showed. Nora had created a new family, a chosen family, bound not by blood, but by a shared history of survival. She, Maya, Isabella, Leo, and baby Hope. They were a strange and wonderful constellation, a testament to the power of truth and the resilience of the human heart. Mason had disappeared from public life. The Harper Empire was still standing, but its reputation was tarnished. Beatrice was a recluse, a queen in a gilded cage of her own making. One day, a letter arrived for Nora. It was from Mason. It was not an apology, not really. It was a rambling, self-pitying account of his life, of the pressures he had faced, the expectations he had tried to live up to. But in the last line, there was a flicker of something real. "I hope she has your strength," he wrote, "and your heart." Nora read the letter and then put it away. It was a ghost from a life that was no longer hers. She looked at her daughter, sleeping peacefully in her crib, and she smiled. The future was unwritten, and for the first time in a long time, she was not afraid. She was ready. Nora's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can come from the people we trust the most. But it's also a story of incredible strength, of a woman who refused to be silenced, who fought back against a powerful and ruthless family to protect her child and reclaim her life. She found justice not through revenge, but through the truth. Her journey from a gilded cage to a life of authentic freedom shows us that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to rewrite our own story. If Nora's fight for survival and redemption moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear a story of hope and resilience. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true-to-life stories that will touch your heart and make you think. Thank you for watching. Or, the clinking of ice in his whiskey glass was the only sound that dared to break the suffocating silence. Elena watched Liam, her husband of 5 years, as he stared out the penthouse window at the glittering, indifferent city below. This was supposed to be their anniversary, a celebration of the life they had meticulously built. But the man before her was a stranger, his shoulders tense, his jaw set in a way that had nothing to do with love. When he finally turned, his eyes, the same ones that had once promised her forever, were as cold and hard as the glass in his hand. "I'm leaving you," he said, the words cutting through the fragile hope she'd been clinging to all night. He didn't just choose another woman. He chose to shatter Elena's world on the one night she was planning to tell him it was about to expand, with the secret of a new life stirring within her. The scent of roasted rosemary and garlic filled the apartment, a warm, savory cloud that stubbornly defied the evening's chill. Elena adjusted the sleeve of her silk maternity blouse, a recent purchase, still loose enough to conceal her nascent bump. and gave the herb-crusted rack of lamb a final, satisfied look. Everything was perfect. The table was set with their wedding china, the one they only used for special occasions. A bottle of expensive champagne, a gift from a client of Liam's, was chilling in a silver bucket, though she would only be having a celebratory sip. In the center of the table, a single white rose stood in a slender vase, a mirror of the one he had given her on their first date. 5 years. It felt like a lifetime, and no time at all. She smoothed her hand over her belly, a secret smile playing on her lips. Tonight, she would give Liam the ultimate anniversary gift. After 2 years of quiet heartache, of negative tests and forced optimism, it had finally happened. They were pregnant. She imagined his face, the surprise melting into joy, the way he would drop to his knees and press his ear to her stomach, talking to the tiny person who was a part of them both. The thought sent a giddy, warm tremor through her. The clock on the wall chimed 8, then 8:30. A familiar knot of anxiety began to tighten in her chest. Liam was late. He was often late. His work as a lead architect at his father's prestigious firm was demanding. But tonight was different. He had promised. "I'll be home by 7, Elle. We'll open that bottle and celebrate properly," he'd texted that morning. She sent a quick message. "Hey, everything okay? Dinner is ready when you are. Sexuom." The 3 dots appeared, then vanished. No reply. By 9:15, the lamb was cooling. The candles were burning low, and the anxiety in her chest had morphed into a dull, heavy dread. She had changed out of the silk blouse and into a comfortable cashmere sweater, the pretense of a glamorous anniversary dinner feeling more and more like a foolish charade. The jingle of keys in the door finally came just before 10. Liam walked in, shedding his tailored coat and dropping his briefcase by the door with a thud that echoed the sinking of her heart. He didn't look at her, didn't seem to notice the beautifully set table or the aroma of the carefully prepared meal. He walked straight to the bar cart and poured himself a generous measure of whiskey, the clinking of the bottle against the glass sharp and jarring. "Liam? I was so worried," Elena said, her voice softer than she intended. "I made the lamb you love." He took a long swallow of his drink before finally turning to face her. His face, usually so handsome and expressive, was a cold, unreadable mask. There were no laugh lines around his eyes, no warmth in his mouth. He looked exhausted, but it was more than that. He looked empty. "We need to talk," he said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Elena's hands grew cold. She wrapped her arms around herself, a subconscious gesture to protect the secret she held. "Okay. What is it? Is it work? Your father?" He shook his head, avoiding her gaze as he stared into the amber liquid in his glass. "It's us, Elena." Each word was a stone dropping into a still pond, the ripples spreading outwards, chilling everything they touched. "Us? What about us? Did I do something wrong?" she asked, her mind racing through the last few weeks, searching for a misstep, an argument, anything that could explain the chasm that had suddenly opened between them. "It's not working anymore," he said, finally meeting her eyes. They were stark, clinical. "I haven't been happy for a long time." The confession hit her with the force of a physical blow. A long time? She thought of their shared laughter last week over a silly movie, the way he'd held her hand at his firm's gala, the comfortable silences they shared over Sunday morning coffee. Had it all been a lie? Was she that blind? I don't understand," she stammered, her throat tight. "Happy? Liam, we've been trying for a baby. We've been building a life." A flicker of something, annoyance, guilt, crossed his face before it was gone. "I know, and I'm sorry. I should have said something sooner." He drained his glass and set it down with a decisive click. "I've met someone. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. The carefully constructed world she inhabited, wife to a brilliant architect, future mother, partner in a life of shared dreams, crumbled into dust. The air rushed out of her lungs. "Someone?" The word was a pathetic whisper. "Her name is Amelia," he said, and the fact that he gave her a name made it brutally, terrifyingly real. "She's a junior associate at the firm. It's serious." Elena sank into one of the dining chairs, her legs no longer able to support her. The perfect table, the single rose, the cooling lamb. It was all a monument to her own delusion. She stared at him. This man she had loved with every fiber of her being, the man whose child was growing inside her, and saw only a stranger. The betrayal was a physical pain, a sharp, searing agony in her chest. "For how long?" she managed to ask, the words scraping her raw throat. "A few months," he admitted, his gaze finally dropping to the floor. Months. Months of lies, of stolen moments, of her sleeping in their bed alone while he was with her. The sickness rose in her throat, hot and bitter. "So that's it?" she asked, a hysterical laugh bubbling up. 5 years of marriage, you just throw it away for a junior associate you've known for a few months? "It's not like that, Elena. It's complicated," he said, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair in a gesture of frustration that felt utterly staged. "I don't want a messy divorce. My father, the firm, it needs to be clean. I've had my lawyer draw up a settlement. It's very generous. You'll be taken care of. A settlement. A business transaction. That's all their life together was worth." The grief that had been choking her was suddenly burned away by a flash of white-hot fury. He stood there, talking about a clean break and a generous settlement, as if he were closing a business deal, not detonating the life of the woman who had sacrificed her own ambitions to support his. He had no idea. He had no idea about the secret she held, the tiny, fluttering heartbeat that tied them together in a way no legal document ever could. She looked at his cold, detached face, at the impatience in his eyes, and the words she had been so desperate to say died on her lips. She would not give him this. She would not hand him this precious secret to be factored into his settlement. She slowly got to her feet, her movement stiff and robotic. She walked past him, past the mockery of their anniversary dinner, and into the bedroom they had shared. She closed the door behind her, the soft click sounding as final as a coffin lid shutting. Sinking onto the edge of their bed, she wrapped both arms tightly around her stomach, a fierce, protective gesture. The tears finally came, silent and scalding, streaming down her face for the man she had lost, and for the child who would now be born into a broken home. The dream was over. This was the cold, harsh reality. The morning light that filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows was pale and merciless, illuminating the wreckage of the night before. Elena had slept in their bed, a vast, empty expanse of cool linen that still held the faint, traitorous scent of Liam. She hadn't cried herself to sleep. The shock had been too profound, leaving her in a state of suspended, numb disbelief. Now, in the harsh light of day, the pain was beginning to seep in, a slow, creeping poison. The apartment, once her sanctuary, felt alien and hostile. Every object held a memory, every corner a ghost of a shared moment. The photograph on the bedside table, the two of them on their honeymoon in Tuscany, laughing, their faces glowing with sun and love, was a cruel joke. She turned it face down with a trembling hand. She had built her entire world around him. When they met, she was a brilliant coder, a rising star at a small tech firm with dreams of launching her own venture. He was the golden boy, the scion of the prestigious Sterling architecture dynasty, charming and ambitious. He'd been captivated by her mind, her independence. "You're not like the other girls, Ella," he used to say. "You have a fire in you." But slowly, subtly, he had extinguished that fire. His life was all-consuming. The late nights, the networking events, the constant pressure to live up to his father's legacy. He needed her support, her unwavering presence. "I can't do this without you," he'd plead. And she, besotted and in love, had believed him. She'd put her own career on the back burner, taking on freelance projects she could do from home, managing their lives so he could focus on his ascent. She became the perfect corporate wife, an elegant, intelligent accessory on his arm. And she had told herself it was worth it. For him, for them, for the family she was so desperate to build. A noise from the walk-in closet startled her. "Liam!" He was back. A foolish, desperate flicker of hope ignited in her chest. Maybe he had reconsidered. Maybe it was all a horrible, whiskey-fueled mistake. She found him pulling a designer suitcase from the overhead shelf. He was already dressed in a crisp suit, his movements efficient and detached. He was packing. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice raspy. "I'm moving my things out," he said, not looking at her as he began taking suits from their hangers. "I'll stay at the club for a few days until Amelia's lease is up. It's better this way. Cleaner." Cleaner? There was that word again, as if their life together was a stain to be wiped away. "So you're just leaving," she said, the absurdity of it all making her feel lightheaded. "You walk in, blow up our lives, and then you pack a bag and walk out like you're leaving for a business trip?" "Elena, please, don't make this more difficult than it has to be," he sighed, finally turning to face her. His expression wasn't angry or sad, just weary. He looked at her as if she were a problem to be managed. "I told you. I've left the settlement papers on the kitchen counter. My lawyer, Mr. Davies, will be in touch with whomever you choose to represent you. I'm being more than fair." Her eyes drifted to the papers on the polished marble island, a thick, intimidating manila envelope that held the monetary value he had assigned to their 5 years together. "Fair." The word came out as a choked laugh. "You think you can put a price on this? On me? I'm giving you the apartment, free and clear. It's worth over $3 million, and a lump sum of $500,000. That's enough for you to live comfortably for a very long time." He delivered the lines as if he'd rehearsed them, a speech designed to placate and dismiss. He saw it as generosity. She saw it as an insult. This apartment, which his father had gifted them as a wedding present. The money, a pittance from his family's vast fortune, meant to silence her and ensure a smooth, scandal-free exit. He didn't see her contributions, the freelance projects she'd worked on late into the night, the income from which had paid for their vacations, their cars, the small luxuries his salary didn't cover while he was still a junior partner. He didn't see the career she had sacrificed, the social connections she had built on his behalf, the emotional labor of propping up his ego and soothing his anxieties. He saw none of it. And he had no idea that the woman standing before him, the one he was trying to pay off like a discarded employee, was independently wealthier than his entire family. A strange calm washed over her. The need to fight, to scream, to beg simply evaporated. What was the point? The man she had loved was gone, replaced by this cold, calculating stranger. Pleading with him would be like pleading with a brick wall. "Fine," she said, her voice eerily level. Her quiet acquiescence seemed to surprise him. He paused, a suit jacket halfway into his bag. "Fine?" "Yes, fine," she repeated, her gaze steady. "Go to your... Amelia, I'll read the papers. My lawyer will be in touch." He seemed relieved, a small, patronizing smile touching his lips. "Good. I knew you'd be reasonable, Elle. You always were." He zipped up his suitcase and rolled it towards the door, pausing beside her. For a moment, she thought he might touch her, offer some gesture of comfort, however hollow. Instead, he just looked at her with a detached pity. "Take care of yourself, Elena," he said, and then he was gone. The front door clicked shut, the sound final and absolute. Elena stood frozen in the silent apartment. The shock had finally worn off, and in its place, a new feeling was taking root. It was a cold, hard, and unfamiliar thing. A fury so profound it felt like a core of steel solidifying in her gut. He had not just broken her heart. He had insulted her intelligence, dismissed her worth, and underestimated her completely. He thought she was the reasonable, dependent wife he could pay off and forget. He was about to find out how wrong he was. She walked over to the closet, not to his empty side, but to the back, to a dusty corner she hadn't visited in years. Behind a row of winter coats was a small safe. She spun the combination, her fingers moving with remembered certainty. Inside was a sleek, black, encrypted laptop. She carried it to the kitchen island, placing it down beside the insulting settlement offer. She sat down, her posture erect, and lifted the screen. The device whirred to life, the login screen glowing in the dim morning light. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in a complex password that was a string of alphanumeric code. The screen flickered, and a secure, encrypted interface appeared. It was a world away from her domestic life, a ghost of the woman she used to be. And at the center of the screen, in clean, minimalist font, was a single word: Aether. The laptop felt like an artifact from another life. Its cool, metallic surface was a stark contrast to the warm, domestic world she had inhabited for the past 5 years. As the Aether interface loaded, Elena felt a jolt, a strange mix of trepidation and homecoming. She was no longer just Elena Sterling, the soon-to-be ex-wife. She was Cassandra, a name whispered with reverence in the most exclusive circles of decentralized finance and blockchain technology. A ghost. A myth. Before Liam, this had been her life. Aether was her brainchild, born from late nights fueled by coffee and code, a passion project that had spiraled into a revolution. It was a decentralized autonomous organization, DAO, a fully automated financial protocol governed by smart contracts on the blockchain, designed to be more transparent, efficient, and equitable than any traditional banking system. She had written the original white paper, coded the foundational architecture, and launched it into the world under the cloak of anonymity. She wanted the project to be judged on its merits, not on the identity of its creator, and it had worked. Too well. Aether had exploded. Its native token had skyrocketed in value, and the treasury, which collected a small fee from every transaction on the network, had swelled to an unimaginable size. It had become a behemoth, a self-sustaining financial ecosystem managing billions of dollars in assets. And she had walked away. When she met Liam, his world of tangible structures, of steel, glass, and concrete, seemed so much more real than her own world of intangible code. He'd been impressed by her freelance work, but when she tried to explain the complexities of Aether, his eyes had glazed over. "It sounds like a fun little hobby, Elle," he'd said with a patronizing smile. "But you can't build a life on internet money." In her desire for a normal life, for marriage, for a family, for his approval, she had let him believe it was just that. A hobby. She had built herself a back door, a secure administrative key that would allow her to intervene in catastrophic situations, but she had let the community-elected governance council run the day-to-day operations. She had become a silent observer, watching her creation flourish from the sidelines. Now, logging into the administrative dashboard for the first time in years, the numbers on the screen made her dizzy. The treasury wasn't just large, it was astronomical. 9 figures. 10. It had crossed the billion-dollar mark and kept climbing. It was a self-perpetuating engine of wealth, and she, Cassandra, held the master key. Her mind reeled. She looked from the glowing screen, representing a fortune beyond comprehension, to the manila envelope Liam had left on the counter. His generous settlement. The lump sum of $500,000 felt like an insult of cosmic proportions. He was trying to buy her silence for less than 0.05% of what she had quietly built, while he was busy climbing his father's corporate ladder. The sheer, staggering irony of it was almost comical. A new kind of power, cold and clear, began to flow through her veins. It wasn't about the money itself. She had lived modestly, her needs simple. It was about the validation. The proof that the world she had built, the one he had dismissed, was infinitely more vast and powerful than his own. The psychological battle began to rage within her. Part of her, the wounded, heartbroken part, wanted to throw it all in his face. To call him, screaming the numbers from the screen, to watch his arrogant facade crumble as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. She imagined the humiliation, the groveling, the desperate attempts at reconciliation. But another part of her, the cold, logical coder, Cassandra, counseled caution. Revealing her hand now would be an emotional outburst, not a strategic move. Liam had hurt her, but he had also underestimated her, and in his underestimation lay her greatest advantage. He saw her as weak, dependent, and reasonable. It was time to use that perception against him. She spent the rest of the day immersed in the world she had left behind. She read through years of governance proposals, community discussions, and development updates. Ether had evolved, grown, become more than she had ever imagined. The community was vibrant, intelligent, passionate. They spoke of Cassandra with an almost religious awe. She was the oracle, the first coder. They had no idea she was a pregnant woman in a cashmere sweater, sitting in a multi-million-dollar apartment she was about to lose, her heart shattered by a faithless husband. The anonymity she had once cultivated for ideological reasons now became her most powerful shield. As Elena Sterling, she was a victim, a scorned wife to be pitied. But as Cassandra, she was a titan. The plan began to form, not as a detailed blueprint, but as a series of quiet, decisive steps. This would not be a war of scorched earth. It would be a game of chess. He had made his opening move, confident and arrogant. Now it was her turn. She would not use Ether's billions to crush him. That would be too easy, too crude. It would also expose her, and she wasn't ready to give up the shield of Cassandra. Not yet. She would fight him on his own terms, in his own world. She would use the weapons he understood, lawyers, assets, and the slow, meticulous dismantling of his power. She closed the laptop, the screen going dark. The initial shock and grief were still there, a heavy ache in her soul. But they were no longer all-consuming. They were now mixed with something else, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Purpose! She picked up her phone and dialed the number of the top divorce attorney in the city, a woman known for her sharp mind and ruthless tactics. She would not be the broken wife. She would be the architect of her own redemption. Liam Sterling had started this war, but she was going to be the one to finish it. And she would do it not just for herself, but for the tiny, innocent life growing inside her. The offices of Clara Rowe were the antithesis of the opulent, old-money stuffiness of Liam's father's firm. Located in a sleek, modern tower of glass and steel, the space was minimalist and bright, with abstract art on the walls and an air of quiet, formidable competence. Clara herself was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes, an impeccable bob of dark hair, and a presence that radiated both empathy and an unspoken promise that she did not suffer fools. She was known for handling the city's most high-profile, contentious divorces with a combination of legal brilliance and surgical precision. Elena sat opposite her, a file containing Liam's settlement offer on the polished glass table between them. She had intentionally dressed down, in simple trousers and a soft gray sweater, a deliberate choice to present herself as exactly what Liam believed her to be, a woman of modest means, completely dependent on her husband's largesse. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice, Ms. Rowe," Elena began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Please, call me Clara," the lawyer said, offering a small, reassuring smile. "I've reviewed the documents you sent over. Standard procedure for the Sterling family's counsel. They like to come in with a strong opening offer to intimidate and encourage a quick, quiet settlement." She leaned forward, her expression turning serious. "The question is, Elena, is it a fair one?" Elena looked down at the envelope. "He called it generous." Clara gave a short, humorless laugh. "Of course he did. They always do. He's offering you the apartment, which, while valuable, was a gift from his father, and likely wouldn't be considered a divisible marital asset anyway, and a lump sum of $500,000. In exchange, you waive any and all future claims to his income, his inheritance, and his stake in Sterling architecture." She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on the document. "Tell me, what do you estimate his current net worth to be?" "I'm not entirely sure," Elena admitted, which was the truth. Liam was deliberately opaque about his finances. His salary is around $400,000 a year, but there are bonuses, stock options, and his family's wealth is substantial. "Substantial is an understatement," Clara said, pulling up a file on her tablet. "The Sterlings are one of the city's oldest and wealthiest families. Liam is the sole heir. His future inheritance is likely in the 9-figure range. This offer," she gestured to the envelope, "isn't generous. It's an insult. It's designed to make you go away quietly so he can install his new girlfriend with minimal fuss." Hearing it laid out so clinically, so starkly, reignited the cold fire in Elena's gut. His new girlfriend, Amelia Vance, a junior associate at his firm. Clara's eyes sharpened. "He told you about her?" "Yes, he said it's serious." "I see." Clara made a note. "The infidelity will be useful for leverage, though this state has no-fault divorce, so it won't change the financial outcome on its own. It primarily serves to establish his motive for lowballing you." She looked at Elena, her gaze softening slightly. "This is a difficult position to be in. My advice, based on what's in this file, would be to counter with a demand for significantly more spousal support and a larger share of the liquid assets accumulated during the marriage. We can subpoena his financial records, but it will be a fight. His father will bring out the big guns to protect the family fortune." This was the moment. The crossroads. She could follow the standard playbook, fighting for scraps from his table. Or she could start playing her own game. "I want to reject the offer," Elena said firmly. "Good," Clara nodded. "But I don't want to counter, not yet." Clara paused, intrigued. "Go on." "I want you to dig," Elena said, leaning forward. "I want to know everything about Liam's finances for the past 5 years. Every credit card statement, every investment, every wire transfer. I also want to know everything about Amelia Vance, her background, her financial situation, how she was hired at Sterling. I want to know when, exactly, their relationship began." A slow, appreciative smile spread across Clara's face. "You're not interested in just getting your fair share. You're building a case." "I'm gathering information," Elena corrected gently. "He thinks this is a simple financial transaction. He's forgotten who I was before I met him. I want to remind him." She still didn't reveal her secret. Not even to Clara. Ether was her ace, a card to be played only when it would have the most devastating impact. For now she would operate in the world Liam understood. She had another, smaller, secret weapon he had long since forgotten about. "There's something else," Elena said, pulling a thin folder from her handbag. "Before we were married, I had my own investment portfolio, mostly early-stage tech startups. Liam called them my hobby projects. He never took them seriously, so they were never merged with our joint finances. They remained solely in my name. She pushed the folder across the table. Clara opened it, her eyebrows rising as she scanned the contents. The portfolio was a curated list of small, seed-round investments in companies that had, over the past 7 years, become major players in the tech industry. "My God, Elena," Clara breathed, looking up from the pages. "This is impressive. You have an incredible eye. Based on these valuations, this portfolio alone is worth—" "Around $8 million, Elena finished for her. "Give or take, depending on the market." Clara stared at her, a newfound respect dawning in her eyes. The narrative had changed. Elena was not the destitute wife being cast aside. She was a woman of independent means, a shrewd investor in her own right. This changed everything. "He has no idea about this, does he?" Clara asked. "He knows it exists, but he probably assumes it's worth a few $1,000s at best. He stopped asking about it years ago." "This is our first move," Clara said, her voice electric with strategic excitement. "We don't reveal this yet. We let him think you're desperate. We reject his offer without comment. We file our subpoenas for his financial records. We let him get arrogant. We let him try to bully you, and when he does, we show him he's not the only one with resources." Elena felt a surge of relief so profound it almost made her weep. For the first time since Liam had uttered those life-shattering words, she wasn't alone. She had an ally, and she had a plan. "There is one more thing, Clara," Elena said, her hand instinctively going to her stomach. "I'm pregnant." The lawyer's professional composure dissolved, replaced by genuine shock and compassion. "Oh, Elena, does he know?" "No," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "And he can't. Not yet. I won't have my child used as a bargaining chip in his settlement offer." Clara nodded slowly, her mind clearly processing this explosive new variable. The stakes had just been raised exponentially. This was no longer just about money or pride. It was about protecting a future, an innocent life. "Your secret is safe with me," Clara said, her tone fierce and protective. "We will handle this. We will let Mr. Sterling think he is in complete control of the board, but he has no idea what game we're truly playing." The days that followed were a strange limbo. Elena moved through her silent, cavernous apartment like a ghost, the routines of her married life now hollow and meaningless. But beneath the surface of grief, a different kind of energy was humming. The rediscovery of Cassandra and the meeting with Clara had awakened a part of her that had long been dormant. The strategist, the builder, the woman who saw complex systems not as obstacles, but as puzzles to be solved. Her first step was to reconnect with the world she had created. Each evening, after a day spent dealing with the mundane logistics of separation, canceling joint credit cards, changing passwords, she would open the black laptop. She didn't log in as an administrator. Instead, she used a public-facing handle she'd created years ago. Kore, named after the Greek goddess of the underworld, a persona who was just another member of the Ether community. As Kore, she slipped back into the forums and discussion channels. She asked questions, offered opinions on governance proposals, and engaged in technical debates. It was exhilarating. These people were brilliant. Their passion for the decentralized future she had envisioned was palpable. They spoke of Ether's potential to bank the unbanked, to fight corruption, to create a more transparent world. It reminded her that her creation was more than just a treasury of immense wealth. It was a movement. No one suspected that the thoughtful, insightful Kore was also the mythical Cassandra. This anonymity was her shield, allowing her to gauge the health of her creation and feel its pulse without revealing her presence. This quiet re-engagement was more than just a distraction. It was a reclamation of her identity. During the day, she focused on her other secret project, understanding the enemy. Clara's team of private investigators were surgical and discreet. They began to feed Elena a steady stream of information, painting a picture of the betrayal that was far deeper and more calculated than Liam had let on. Amelia Vance was not some naive, star-struck junior. She was 28, ruthlessly ambitious, and came from a family with significant social standing but dwindling finances. Her Instagram profile, which was public, was a carefully curated gallery of her life. Sailing trips, charity galas, equestrian events. She was positioning herself not as a mistress, but as a replacement. A significant upgrade, in her mind, from the quiet, unassuming Elena. There were photos of her at events Elena had been unable to attend due to morning sickness she'd disguised as a stomach bug. In one picture, taken at a gallery opening 2 months ago, Amelia was wearing a familiar emerald necklace. A chill went down Elena's spine. It was a necklace Liam had claimed to have bought for his mother's birthday. The timeline was the most painful part. The affair hadn't started a few months ago. Credit card statements, meticulously analyzed by Clara's forensic accountant, showed hotel bookings, expensive dinners, and lavish gifts dating back almost a year. A whole year of lies. While Elena was timing ovulation cycles and injecting herself with hormones during a brief, difficult round of fertility treatments, Liam was wining and dining his replacement. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. He hadn't just fallen out of love with her. He had actively deceived her during the most vulnerable period of their marriage. The pain was a physical entity, a weight in her chest that made it hard to breathe. There were moments, usually late at night, when the fury would recede, leaving behind a raw, desolate grief. She would curl up in bed, clutching a pillow, and mourn the man she thought she had married, the future she had believed in. She would whisper to the tiny life inside her, promising it would be loved, that it would be enough. These moments of sorrow were essential. They weren't a weakness. They were the fuel. They reminded her why she had to be strong, why she had to be strategic. She began to see the power imbalance of her marriage with stark clarity. It hadn't just been about money or family connections. It had been about information. Liam had held all the cards because he had controlled the narrative. He presented himself as the burdened, brilliant architect, and she, the supportive, slightly naive wife. He had compartmentalized his life so effectively that she had only ever seen the carefully edited version he wanted her to see. Now she was the one with the information. She knew about the secret bank account he'd opened 6 months ago. She knew about the weekend trips with Amelia, disguised as site visits. She knew the timeline, the lies, the depth of the betrayal. And he knew nothing. He had no idea she was watching, listening, piecing together the truth. He had no idea about the $8 million portfolio waiting in the wings. And he certainly had no idea that his quiet, reasonable wife was the anonymous creator of one of the largest decentralized financial platforms in the world. One afternoon, a message came through from the lead investigator. It was a piece of audio, captured legally by a source near the firm. It was a snippet of a conversation between Liam and his father, Harrison Sterling. "Just sign the papers and be done with it," Liam's voice said, tight with annoyance. "She's being difficult." "Difficult how?" Harrison's gruff voice replied. "She rejected the offer. No counter, just silence. Her lawyer is sending subpoenas. It's a classic shakedown, Dad. She's going to try and bleed me." There was a pause. Then Harrison's voice, cold and dismissive. "I told you that girl was a mistake, Liam. Too much ambition for her own good. Don't worry. We'll handle her. Davies will bury her in paperwork. She doesn't have the resources to fight us. Squeeze her. Freeze the joint accounts. Let her feel what it's like to be cut off. She'll come crawling back to the table within a week." Elena's blood ran cold. Squeeze her. The callousness. The arrogance. They saw her as nothing more than an inconvenient pest to be crushed. They were about to make a move. A classic power play to leave her financially stranded and desperate. She forwarded the audio file to Clara with a simple message. "They're making their move. I think it's time to let them see one of our cards." A quiet smile touched her lips. They thought they were squeezing a mouse. They had no idea they were poking a dragon. The call came from her bank 2 days later. A polite, apologetic manager informed her that their joint checking and savings accounts had been frozen by a legal directive from Mr. Sterling's attorney. The credit cards she had used for years were simultaneously declined when she tried to order groceries online. Harrison Sterling's directive had been carried out. They had cut her off. For a moment, a primal panic seized her. It was the feeling they wanted her to have. The cold dread of being powerless, of having your lifeline severed. It was a stark reminder of the life she had been living, one where her financial security was intrinsically tied to Liam's goodwill. She had allowed herself to become dependent, a fact that now felt like a personal failing. But the panic lasted only a moment. It was quickly replaced by a cold, resolute calm. This was not a surprise. It was a predicted move in a game she was now prepared to play. She hung up the phone, took a deep breath, and called Clara. "It's happened," Elena said, her voice even. "The accounts are frozen." "As expected," Clara replied, her tone crisp and ready. "Arrogant fools. They're walking right into our trap. Are you ready?" "I'm ready," Elena said. The plan was simple, elegant, and designed for maximum psychological impact. It wasn't about unleashing overwhelming force. It was about a precise, surgical strike that would shatter Liam's perception of her and sow the first seeds of doubt in his mind. Clara's office drafted a letter. It was not addressed to Liam's counsel, but directly to Harrison Sterling's chief financial officer, a man known for his meticulous, risk-averse nature. The letter was polite and professional. It expressed confusion over the freezing of the joint accounts, stating that Ms. Sterling had ample personal resources and had no need for marital funds for her legal expenses or living costs. To substantiate this claim, the letter included a single attachment, a verified third-party valuation of Elena Sterling's private investment portfolio. It was not a full breakdown, just the top-line summary, the current market value, certified by a top accounting firm, $8,245,000. The letter concluded by politely suggesting that to avoid any unnecessary legal complications or public scrutiny of the Sterling family's aggressive tactics against a woman of independent means, it would be prudent to unfreeze the marital accounts immediately. It was a checkmate delivered with a smile. Elena could only imagine the scene when that letter arrived. It wouldn't have been a dramatic explosion, but a quiet, stunned silence in a mahogany-paneled office. Harrison Sterling, a man who prided himself on knowing everything, on controlling every variable, had just been completely blindsided. The broke, dependent wife he had intended to squeeze was, in fact, a multi-millionaire in her own right. The response was almost instantaneous. Within 3 hours, Clara received a terse, formal email from Liam's lawyer, Mr. Davies, stating that the freezing of the accounts was a regrettable administrative error and that all funds were once again accessible. There was no apology, no explanation, just a clipped, professional retreat. The silence from Liam himself was deafening. Elena knew his father would have called him immediately. She could picture Liam's confusion, his disbelief. Elle? No, that's impossible. Her hobby projects? She was just playing around with a few $1,000s from her old job. He would be scrambling, his entire understanding of the woman he'd married tilting on its axis. He had cast her in the role of the damsel in distress, and she had just revealed herself as a queen with her own army. That evening, as she was making a simple dinner, her phone buzzed. It was Liam. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was the first time he had tried to contact her directly since he'd walked out. She let it ring, her hand hovering over the screen. Answering would be a mistake. Talking to him now would be emotional, messy. She needed to maintain tactical distance. He let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text message appeared. "We need to talk. That money. Where did it come from? Call me." The text was a crack in his armor. The confident, dismissive man was gone, replaced by one who was confused and demanding answers. The power dynamic had begun its slow, seismic shift. She didn't feel triumph. Not yet. But she felt a grim satisfaction. He was seeing a version of her he had refused to acknowledge for years. He had dismissed her intellect, belittled her ambitions, and now those very things were coming back to haunt him. She didn't reply to his text. Instead, she opened the black laptop and logged back into the Ether forums as Core. She immersed herself in a complex debate about a new security protocol, her mind sharp and focused. She was building, contributing, creating value in a world of her own making. Liam's world was one of inherited wealth and corporate power plays. It was a world built on perception and intimidation. She had just proven that she could not be intimidated. He thought he was playing chess with a pawn. He was about to find out he was facing another queen. The game had just begun, and for the first time, Elena felt a genuine, unshakable belief that it was a game she was going to win. The first move was hers, and it had landed exactly as intended. The discovery of Elena's multi-million-dollar portfolio changed the texture of the conflict. The Sterling family's legal team, clearly acting on Harrison's rattled instructions, shifted tactics from aggressive intimidation to meticulous, invasive scrutiny. They were no longer trying to starve her out. They were trying to claim her success as their own. Their new legal argument was that her investment portfolio, while held in her name, should be considered a marital asset. They claimed her success was only possible due to the stable home environment and financial security provided by Liam. The argument was as insulting as it was predictable. It was the last refuge of a man who could not fathom a woman's success being her own. Liam, goaded by his father and his own wounded pride, clung to this narrative. He had to believe he was somehow responsible for her fortune. Otherwise, the story he told himself, the story of the brilliant husband and the dependent wife, would completely unravel. The battle escalated, moving from letters and emails to formal legal proceedings. The next step was the deposition. It was to be held in a neutral conference room at a third-party legal firm, a sterile, impersonal space for a confrontation that was anything but. Elena walked in with Clara at her side. She was now visibly pregnant, her condition no longer a secret she could easily hide. She had informed Liam via Clara a week prior, a cold, formal notification that had reportedly left him speechless and enraged, convinced it was some sort of ploy. He was already there, sitting beside his lawyer, Mr. Davies. He looked thinner, his face drawn and tired. The easy arrogance was gone, replaced by a sullen, simmering anger. When his eyes landed on her, and then on her swollen belly, his expression was a toxic cocktail of fury, confusion, and a flicker of something she couldn't name. Guilt? Regret? It was impossible to tell. Amelia was not present. Clara had informed her that their relationship was already showing signs of strain under the pressure. The deposition began. Davies, a slick, silver-haired man, led the questioning. His strategy was clear: to belittle Elena, to portray her as an amateur who got lucky, and to build a case that Liam was the true architect of their financial lives. "Mrs. Sterling," Davies began, his tone dripping with condescension, "let's talk about this portfolio of yours. A few fortunate bets on some internet companies, is that right?" "They were strategic, long-term investments in sectors I understood well," Elena replied, her voice calm and measured, just as she and Clara had rehearsed. "And you made these investments with what capital precisely?" "With income from my own freelance software development work and savings from my career prior to the marriage. Liam scoffed audibly from across the table. Freelance work? Elena, you made a few $1,000s a month building websites for dentists. Let's not pretend you were some tech mogul. Clara shot him a warning look. Mr. Sterling, you will allow the witness to answer the questions. But Liam was too agitated to be silenced. This is ridiculous. That money, her success, it happened while she was married to me, while she was living in my home, benefiting from my name, my connections. This was the moment. The culmination of all the lies, the dismissals, the years of being underestimated. This was the trap they had so carefully laid. Clara leaned forward, her voice dangerously soft. Mr. Sterling, since you seem so confident that your wife's financial successes are intrinsically tied to you, perhaps you could enlighten us. Are you familiar with a decentralized autonomous organization known as Ether? Liam frowned, confused by the non sequitur. Ether? No, what is that? Some other little project of hers? Hardly little, Clara said, a sharp glint in her eye. It's one of the largest and most successful DeFi protocols in the world. Its treasury currently manages assets in excess of $1.3 billion. Davies shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly unsure where this was going. Liam just looked blank. $1 billion? What does that have to do with anything? Clara slid a slim, bound document across the table. This is the original white paper for the Ether protocol, published 7 years ago under a pseudonym. And these, she added, placing a set of notarized, cryptographically signed documents next to it, are the original deployment keys and Genesis block signatures, digital fingerprints, if you will, fingerprints that have been authenticated by 3 of the world's leading blockchain forensics firms. She paused, letting the weight of her words fill the silent room. She then turned her gaze to Elena. Elena, she said, her voice clear and strong, could you please tell the room the pseudonym under which you authored this paper and launched the Ether protocol? Elena met Liam's gaze across the table. The anger in his eyes was slowly being replaced by a dawning, horrified confusion. She held his gaze, and for the first time, she did not look away. Cassandra, she said. The name hung in the air. To Liam, it meant nothing. But Davies, whose firm had a growing tech law division, went pale. He snatched the document, his eyes flying across the first page, then to the forensic reports. His jaw went slack. Wait, Liam said, his voice a confused rasp. What is this? What's Cassandra? Davies looked at his client, his face ashen. Cassandra, he said, his voice barely a whisper, is the anonymous founder of Ether, a legend in the tech world. They say she's one of the wealthiest and most influential figures in the entire blockchain space. Her personal holdings are estimated to be... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Clara finished it for him. Her personal holdings, derived from the initial token allocation, are currently valued at just over $900 million. An asset that was created, developed, and launched 2 years before she ever met you, Mr. Sterling. Silence. A deep, profound, soul-shattering silence. Elena watched Liam's face. It was a slow-motion collapse. The confusion, the denial, the desperate search for some other explanation, and then, finally, the horrifying, world-altering comprehension. The blood drained from his face, leaving it a sickly gray color. He looked at her. Truly looked at her. As if for the first time. He wasn't seeing the quiet, supportive wife. He was seeing a stranger, a titan, a woman so far beyond his comprehension that she might as well have been from another planet. The generous settlement. The $8 million portfolio he'd tried to claim. It was all pocket change. Dust. He hadn't just made a mistake. He had made a blunder of such historic, catastrophic proportions that it would define the rest of his life. He hadn't just left his wife. He had fumbled $1 billion dynasty. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He just stared, his world, his ego, his entire sense of self-worth imploding in the sterile quiet of that conference room. The power imbalance hadn't just been shifted. It had been annihilated. The fallout from the deposition was not a loud explosion, but a quiet, devastating implosion of Liam's world. The news didn't break in the tabloids. Clara's team made sure of that with ironclad, non-disclosure agreements, but it ripped through the rarefied circles of the city's elite. The story was too shocking, too delicious to remain contained. Harrison Sterling, the patriarch who controlled everything, had been rendered impotent. His son, the Golden Boy, had been revealed as a fool of monumental proportions. The Sterling legal team capitulated immediately. The aggressive Mr. Davies was replaced by a team of subdued corporate lawyers whose only job was to facilitate a swift and silent surrender. All claims on Elena's assets were dropped. The divorce papers were redrafted, this time to her exact specifications. She asked for nothing from him. Not a dollar, not a piece of furniture. She wanted only one thing: a clean, absolute severance. She kept the apartment not because she needed it, but because it was hers, a silent monument to his miscalculation. Liam's attempts to contact her were frantic and pathetic. He left dozens of voicemails, his tone shifting from disbelief to rage to desperate, pleading remorse. "Ella, call me. We need to talk about this misunderstanding. How could you not tell me? All these years! You made me look like a fool." "I made a mistake, Elle. A terrible, terrible mistake. I love you. I never stopped loving you. It was Amelia. She meant nothing. We can fix this. Think of the baby. Our baby." The words, which might have once shattered her heart, now felt hollow and transparent. He didn't love her. He loved what she represented. Power, wealth, a status so far beyond his own that he couldn't even grasp it. He was a drowning man clawing for a life raft. She listened to the messages with a detached, clinical sadness, then deleted them. His relationship with Amelia disintegrated almost immediately. The ambitious junior associate had hitched her wagon to a rising star in the Sterling dynasty, not to a publicly humiliated fool who had fumbled $1 billion fortune. Their curated romance, built on ambition and mutual self-interest, could not withstand the harsh glare of his failure. Their arguments, according to Clara's sources, were spectacular. She accused him of being an idiot. He accused her of being a gold digger. Within weeks, she had cleared out her desk at the firm and vanished from his life. Another casualty of his catastrophic error in judgment. Elena, meanwhile, moved with quiet purpose. She began the slow, deliberate process of stepping out of the shadows. She couldn't remain the mythical Cassandra forever. Not if she was going to raise a child and run a global foundation. Through a carefully managed press release issued by Clara, she revealed her identity to the Ether community. The response was overwhelmingly positive. They embraced her, thrilled to finally put a face to the name of their visionary founder. She was no longer hiding. She started the Ether Foundation, a philanthropic organization dedicated to funding education for girls in STEM and supporting female-led tech startups. Her new life began to take shape, one built not on a partnership with a man, but on her own vision, her own intellect, and her own terms. One cool autumn evening, about a month before her due date, there was a knock on her apartment door. It was Liam. He looked awful. He had lost weight, there were dark circles under his eyes, and his expensive suit hung on him as if it belonged to another man. The arrogance had been completely stripped away, leaving behind someone lost and broken. "Elena," he said, his voice raw, "please, just 5 minutes." She hesitated, then stepped aside, letting him into the foyer but no further. I don't understand," he said, looking around the apartment that was once his. "Why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you let me believe you were someone else?" Elena looked at him, and for the first time, she felt not anger or pain, but a profound sense of pity. He truly didn't get it. He couldn't comprehend a world where a woman's identity wasn't defined by her relationship with him. "I didn't let you believe anything, Liam," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You saw what you wanted to see. You wanted a wife who was supportive and uncomplicated, who wouldn't overshadow you. So that's what you saw. You never once asked about the complexities of my work. You dismissed my passions. The woman you thought I was a reflection of your own needs and your own ego. I was always Cassandra. You were just never curious enough to find her." The truth of her words seemed to land on him with a physical weight. He sagged against the doorframe. "I destroyed us," he whispered. "I had everything, and I threw it away for nothing." "No," Elena said gently. "You didn't destroy us. You revealed what was already broken. You revealed who you really are, a man who only values a person based on what they can do for him." She placed a protective hand on her belly. "I told you about the pregnancy, not as a weapon or a bargaining chip, but as a fact. This child is my daughter. She will be raised by me. She will inherit my legacy, not my money, and she will never be used as a way for you to get access to my fortune." He looked up, his eyes filled with a desperate final plea. Can I be a part of her life?" Elena was silent for a long moment. The vengeful part of her wanted to say no, to cut him out completely, to make him pay for his betrayal for the rest of his life. But then she thought of her daughter, and she knew that hatred was a heavy burden to place on a child. She would not be defined by his cruelty. She would be defined by her own grace. "You can be her father," she said quietly, "but you and I are over. There is no going back. Any relationship you have with her will be on my terms, with clear, firm boundaries. It will be a privilege you have to earn, not a right you are owed. Do you understand?" He nodded, a broken man finally accepting the consequences of his actions. He knew he had lost her forever. He had chosen his mistress, and in doing so, had lost an empire he never even knew existed. The birth of Maya was not the dramatic, frantic event Elena had once pictured with Liam by her side. It was a calm, peaceful affair. Clara was her birthing partner, a steady, reassuring presence in the delivery room. When the doctors placed the tiny, red-faced infant on her chest, Elena felt a wave of love so fierce and all-encompassing it left her breathless. This tiny person, with a tuft of dark hair and her own determined scowl, was the future. Months melted into a beautiful, exhausting, joyful blur. Elena discovered a capacity for love she hadn't known she possessed. Maya was the center of her universe, a bright, beautiful star around which her new life gracefully orbited. The Ether Foundation was launched to global acclaim. Elena, no longer hiding behind a pseudonym, became a powerful and respected voice in the worlds of technology and philanthropy. She was featured in magazines, not as a billionaire's scorned ex-wife, but as a visionary founder, a role model, a force for change. She invested in companies that mattered, mentored young women who reminded her of her younger self, and used her vast resources to build a better, more equitable world. She was no longer defined by Liam's betrayal. She was defined by her own resilience, her own brilliance, her own grace. The pain of what he had done had not vanished entirely. It was a scar on her heart, a reminder of a past life. But it no longer had power over her. It was simply a part of her story, the catalyst that had forced her to reclaim the incredible woman she had always been. Liam, true to her terms, began the slow, difficult process of earning a place in his daughter's life. He started with supervised visits at the apartment, an hour at a time. He was awkward at first, a stranger fumbling with a baby who had no idea who he was. But he was persistent. He showed up. He was sober. He was humble. Elena watched him from a distance, her heart holding a cautious, neutral space. He had broken her trust, but for Maya's sake, she was willing to let him try to build a new, different kind of trust. He would never be her partner again, but perhaps, in time, he could truly be a father. His own life was a shadow of what it had been. He'd left his father's firm, unable to endure the constant whispers and pitying looks. He was trying to start his own small architectural practice, a humbling endeavor after the grand heights he had once occupied. He was a man reduced, not by her vengeance, but by the weight of his own choices. One sunny afternoon, Elena was sitting on a bench in the park, watching Maya take her first wobbly steps on the soft grass. Her daughter stumbled, fell, and looked up at her, her face crumpling, ready to cry. But then she saw her mother's smiling, encouraging face, and instead of crying, she pushed herself up and tried again. In that small moment, Elena saw everything. The fall, the moment of pain, the decision to rise and try again. It was the story of her own life. She had stumbled, she had fallen, she had been broken. But she had not stayed down. She had risen stronger and more whole than ever before. She looked at her beautiful, resilient daughter, and then up at the bright, limitless sky, her heart full of a quiet, unshakable peace. The future was not something that happened to her. It was something she was building, block by block, a magnificent structure built on a foundation of her own strength. The story of Elena is a powerful reminder that our deepest betrayals can often lead to our greatest transformations. It's a testament to the fact that a person's true worth is never defined by someone else's inability to see it. If her journey from heartbreak to empowerment resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories of resilience, redemption, and the incredible power of the human spirit. Thank you for watching.